Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the program. Tonight, it's a showdown that's hard to ignore. A face-off between the Senate and suspended Kogi Central Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan. Earlier today, Senator Akpoti-Uduaghan made a dramatic attempt to return to the National Assembly.
She's not right. She needs to enter inside there.
We're fighting for you.
It's all right.
She's all right.
She needs to enter there. There's services for that matter.
Why are you stopping her?
Why are you stopping her? Why are you stopping her? Why are you stopping her? You want to know? What do you know?
Blocked at the gate, she didn't back down. Instead, she walked into the complex on foot, surrounded by supporters and activists. But again, she was stopped. Not even her insistence or the crowd behind her could get her into the chambers. Her argument is that the July 4 court ruling lifted her suspension, which had been handed down in March following her sexual harassment allegations against Senate President Godswill Akpabio. Now, let's quote the most talked about parts of the ruling. Item 10 talks about to suspend a member for 6 months equals 180 days. The same number of days the National Assembly sits. The judge says, I find this excessive and overreaching. And then there is item 11. The Senate has the power to review or even amend that law because it's excessive. Item 12, the Senate has the power to, and I believe should, recall the plaintiff and allow her to resume representing the people who sent her there. End of quote. But the Senate isn't budging. Its position is that judgment, this particular judgment is an opinion, something like an advisory, not an order. They insist that the suspension was based on internal rules and procedures and that the judiciary cannot dictate how the legislature disciplines its members. So we're left with some questions. Does this court ruling in any way carry enough legal weight to override Senate procedures? Or was the suspension truly excessive or within the Senate's rights under its standing orders? And in the end, who now speaks for the people of Kogi Central while this drama plays out? Joining me tonight is legal analyst and public affairs commentator Libros Oshoma, who's been following this development closely. Mr. Oshoma, thank you for joining us on Beyond the Headlines. I'd like us to start with some clarity. In your legal opinion, does this judgment compel the Senate to lift the suspension, or is it, as the Senate claims, merely advisory?
Thank you, Nifemi. Let's first and foremost put some perspective to this judgment. Ordinarily, if for a fundamental right enforcement request, one would have expected that the court will give directive, and not just, express mere opinion. So what the court did, first and foremost, was to recognize the fact that the Senate, being an arm of government, has the right, has power, to discipline its members. And secondly, also, that the court lacks jurisdiction to interfere in the affairs of the Senate. But that once it has to do with fundamental right enforcement, and that there is need, whether those rights have been abused, or whether there is a threat to abuse those rights, or whether there's perceived threats that there is a need for the court to interfere. And so on that ground, the court had to look into the matter. And like the paragraph that you read, I think paragraph 11, 12, and 13, there have been a lot of interpretations to it. Some people have argued that there is no express provision barring her from, barring the Senate from recalling her. But one word that is concurrently used in that ruling, that order, enrollment of order, as we call it, is that the Senate, should consider recalling, a consideration to the Senate. That's why I said that the court, one would have expected that the court would give directive and express opinion. So, having laid that foundation, the court expressing opinion, recognizing its powers not to interfere in the dealings of the arms of the affairs of a different arm of government. The court, in also enforcing that request by the courts, certainly there are procedures. The procedure would be that if she was suspended by a resolution, certainly that arm of government will also have to table a resolution before the Senate and its members, and then take a decision on it, maybe by virtue of the request from the court. And anything outside of that resorting to come with supporters and all of that to want to resume will amount to resorting to self-help. I think what is basically happening here is the fact that there is so much tension in the land, and people are looking for opportunities, avenues to escape and to ease steam. And this issues like this create such opportunities, and so the tendency for people want to use that as an avenue to escape and offload steam is very necessary. And so that's why you see all of this drama. I call it drama. I call it drama really because I'm also aware, I've seen the notice of appeal filed by distinguished Senator Natasha, and I like the fact that she has gone on appeal. And if you have gone on appeal, the best way out of it would be to allow the court to, exhaust your right on appeal, and then, allow the court to give clear directive. Having said that, the lower court did not give, a directive. Rather, she just expressed an opinion.
But the judge did say, Mr. Shoma, the judge did say that the 6-month suspension equals 180 sitting days, and therefore deprives the people of Kogi Central of representation. You don't think that's a constitutional concern?
Yes, it is a constitutional concern, but I would have expected, after making that statement, I would have expected the judge to now say, it is hereby ordered that this, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Shoma. Please go ahead.
That it is hereby ordered that these concerns, in view of this concern, it is hereby ordered that she should resume. But the court didn't make that pronouncement because the court knows the limitation of its powers also, that you cannot, haven't recognized, in the first place, haven't recognized that the the Senate had inherent powers by virtue of its rules to regulate its own proceedings, to discipline erring members, because the issue was discipline, unruly behavior on the floor of the Senate. And the court also recognized the fact that the Senate president had the powers to change seats of members by virtue of their rules. Having recognized all of those members, all of those provisions of their rules and their inherent powers, the court did not go further than that to order the Senate to recall her.
Indeed.
The court said in her opinion, these measures are too punitive. You might consider amending that rule because it is punitive. And that's advisory. Just like we say, you remember when the Senate passed resolutions and the executive will say, these resolutions are mere advisory. So what those provisions, those paragraphs simply did for the Senate was, to give Senate advice on a matter. So it is now left for the Senate now to set up its internal mechanism correcting those punitive measures.
I hear you, Mr. Shoma, but it's also sounding like too much power for the Senate, because the court didn't just raise a concern, it urged the Senate to allow her to resume. One would think that carries some moral or political weight, if not a legal force, as you have painted it. But don't you think that the Senate is also taking too much powers through its ruling to be able to suspend an elected representative for as much as 6 months, depriving the constituents the privilege of representation?
You see, that's the unfortunate part of our laws here. If you look at the presidential powers domiciled in the president of Nigeria, no other president in Nigeria in the world has such powers. If you look at the powers domiciled in our legislature, I don't think there's any other legislative arm in the world that exercise such powers. So it's unfortunate, really, but it is what it is. That's the saddest part of it, and which is why some people are clamoring for electoral reform, so that we can have people who will truly not be self-serving, people who will look at the rules and say, no, we can't abrogate this kind of powers to ourselves. There should be a balance. But in this case, the court also recognized the fact that being a distinct arm of government, certainly the court, there's a limit to how much the court can interfere. And then also, that's why the court says, look, this is a moral obligation, it's a moral burden. It does not carry the weight of a legal authority. Indeed. Because first and foremost went into the limitation of its powers to interfere. If you read the body of the judgment, it first went into the limitation of its powers to interfere in the affairs of the internal affairs of any other arm of government. Right. But also now recognizing the fact that this is a fundamental right enforcement matter, and so they cannot close their eyes to it. Then also us now as a people to look at our internal mechanism and say, okay, we have been advised to recall. So let us set up in motion a process to recall her back so that our people can be represented. Or in the alternative, let us exhaust the position of the Court of Appeal on this matter. So that's clearly what our separation of power is about. But you see, the challenge here is that, unfortunately, we interpret the law to suit the whims and caprices of certain persons. When it favors them, they will tell you, this is the law. And when it doesn't, they'll tell you, they would begin to look for interpretations to it. Unfortunately, that's our democracy, but it is what it is. Some lawyers have argued, like you said, that there is no definite order stopping her from resuming. But the big question is, if she was suspended by a resolution and the court has expressed an opinion in the matter, what will be the procedure for her recall? The procedure for her recall by the Senate rule is that having been suspended by resolution, your recall also must be by resolution. So it has nothing to do with the opinion expressed by the court. And then also, it is not a violation of a court order because the order was not directive. It was an opinion expressed by the court. I would have expected, if the law permits the court to, I would have expected the order to be more directive. But unfortunately, it is not. The court has also identified, her limitations. I'm going to identify their limitations. If the court goes beyond that, definitely we don't know what the Court of Appeal will say in that regard. That maybe that the court does not have the powers. If you remember, let me take your mind back a little bit, Nifemi. You remember during the budget defense and presentation, I think was it 2011 or so, or 2015, thereabout. There was a court order. There was a court matter where a member of the House of Rep also approached the court to bar the Senate from interfering with budget presentation and the rest. And the court said, well, look, we do not have that powers. Even though the court, the House of Rep went ahead to say, look, the court knows their limitation. And then also, there is another matter I would also want us to refer to, where the, what do you call it, Ali Ndume was suspended, and Ningi's suspension, although he didn't approach the court, but rather what he did was to apologize to his colleagues, and he was recalled. Ali Ndume's suspension, he challenged the suspension in court, and at the end of the day, I think the court said also in the same vein that the measures were too punitive. So, but the way these issues can be resolved, I think being colleagues, the best way they can resolve it is that they are all distinguished senators. They should approach, she can approach our other colleagues, our other members, and then lobby them, and they can table the matter before the Senate by resolution, and a decision will be taken on it on the floor of the Senate to recall her. That's why in parliamentary circle, we use the word lobby. Also, in the same vein, you remember that consistently, the executive, like I had said earlier, the executive had referred to resolutions of the National Assembly as mere advisory. So all of this wouldn't have been necessary if the brand of democracy is the one with a humane face.
Indeed.
We wouldn't have all of this drama.
There are concerns, though, that this case perhaps may further set a dangerous precedent where the courts tiptoe around legislative overreach simply because it's internal. So now Senator Natasha will now have to return to court to demand enforcement, or we probably will now rely on whether the Senate will show discretion and recall her, even if just for the sake of our constituents. But what I want us to explore, because of our time quickly, is what you consider the long-term fix here. A constitutional amendment, a clearer boundary between the arms of government, or just better political will?
Yeah, first and foremost, we say the law is what the court says it is. There are some daring judges who, despite all of this rule, who would go ahead to make pronouncement and say, you know what, these rules are too punitive. And because they are too punitive, I hereby nullify them. There are some judges, some very conservative judges, who would go that route to say, because they are punitive and because they override sections of the Constitution by depriving of a constituent representation, I hereby nullify those sections of the rules. You can have such situations if the courts, are forceful and daring enough. But in this case, that's not the provision. That's not the position. The court has said, well, it's an opinion. And then secondly, there's a provision for constitutional amendment now. Maybe we might also just want to take a closer look at the powers, this separation of powers as expressed in our constitution. That the idea of suspending a senator for 180 days or for 6 months or for more than 15 days, as the case may be, or legislative sitting, is too punitive and should not be left in the hand or as internal affairs of the Senate, and that the court will have powers to interfere on it. But our court most times have not been known, to be radical in their interpretations. Our court has not been known to be radical in interpreting, some sections of this constitution. They have already most times taken the narrow path, maybe so as not to set bad precedent, because, it might be a very small matter to them. If the court, is very radical in approach, that also might create problem for both the courts, the judiciary, and the legislature in future. But the ultimate aim should be about representation. If the power to represent is domiciled in the people. And also, there's need for those people who are representing their people, the attitude and the conduct of those same people, there's need for it to also be above board. Situations where we see, members of the National Assembly, fight openly, throw chairs, insult each other as if they're in kindergarten. And if there are also no rule to streamline those misconduct, then we might just be breathing another operation wet here, what that we saw in the First Republic. So it's a very thin line. That's why, to strike a balance, we might still have to resort back, to the courts to take, a closer look at it and maybe give a radical approach to, the interpretation, not minding, whatever consequences.
We'll see how all of this play out. We're also looking forward to speak with the senator herself at the top of the hour. Liberal Oshoma, thank you so much for talking to us on Beyond the Headlines.
My pleasure.
Well, some say perhaps Senator Natasha should just write a letter of apology and lobby his colleagues, like the lawyer said, to get back to the Senate for the sake of our constituents. But if she chooses the other route, what are the chances that she will get back in time? We're tracking this story very closely, and we're also following up on the news at 7. Don't go away, everyone. You can watch this again at midnight and 6 a.m. tomorrow. I am Nifemi Oguntoye.